Got a question? What do you want for Christmas? What did you say? What do you want for Christmas? Some of you would be electronic gadgets. Others might want clothes. Some of you want time off. It'd be nice to have a vacation. You haven't been able to have one. Others of you are looking forward to family gatherings. Have everyone together. You have people coming in and out of town, or you're going to be able to go visit others who you haven't connected with in a while. Some of you like reconnecting with friends, getting letters. You read through the things with the pictures and the newsletters from what's happened over the past year, and it's a time to reconnect. We want different things. And from one angle, that's very true. From one angle, when we look at what we really want, we want a bunch of different things, but from another angle, we want the same thing. We all want the same thing. When you boil it right down, you get right down to the nub of it. We want contentment. Basically what we want, and contentment is having what I want. We might want different things, but contentment is when I have what I want. Some of us want this, some of us want that, but all of us want. And when we have what we want, we're content. Or when we don't have what we don't want. That's associated with contentment as well. It's no good to have what you want if you have a bunch of stuff you don't want. But if I have what I want, and if I don't have what I don't want, I'm content. I think probably we come closest to contentment during this time of the season. We brush more closely with contentment during Christmas than at other times. We think of getting what we want. And whatever it is, if it's stuff or if it's relationships or if it's connecting, whatever it is, it comes closest at Christmas time. And in the same breath, at the Christmas season, we come face to face with how far away contentment really is. We find that contentment is elusive. You see it in kids' faces. When you have a kid and they are checking out presents underneath the tree, how fast do they go from that look of contentment to the creeping in of discontentment? It might be while they are unwrapping gifts, and where is it? The thing that I really wanted is not here. And the temporary joy that they experienced when they were unwrapping some things became, or sometimes it has to wait till after things unwrap later on that day or whatever. But we see it in kids' faces, that look of contentment lasts a while, but it dissipates. Not only just for children, if we're honest, we see it in ourselves. The families here, we're all safe. We have food to eat, all under one roof. We might not have been able to get everything everyone wanted, but we got enough, and we feel like we should be content. And we're not. Contentment is elusive, and we wonder why we're not content. But it's something that we cannot not search for. The search for contentment is something that all of us pursue. To have what I want, to not have what I don't want. Let's talk about the search for contentment. If contentment is about having what I want and not having what I don't want, there's really two strategies, and that's it. I can either satisfy my desires or silence my desires. If I satisfy my desires, what that looks like is I get what I want and get rid of what I don't want. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's one way to contentment. If I see something I want, I go after it. I get what I want. If I see something in my life that I don't want, I take active steps to get rid of that thing, to get what I want, to get rid of what I don't want. If I'm successful in getting what I want, getting rid of what I don't want, content. That's one strategy for trying to find contentment. There's another one, which is silencing desires. Silencing desires has to do with, I need to want what I have. And if I find that there's something that I want that I don't have, to silence the desire means that at some point I try to push that down and just want what I have and don't want what I don't have, and try to keep my wants at bay. So if I can do that, so if I have enough, and that creeping sense of, but there's this, and I can push that down. If I can push it down so that I don't want what I don't have, or I want what I have, then I can be content. Talk about satisfying desires. In order for desires to be satisfied, somebody needs to change what they're doing. And there's only a couple of options. Again, if my desires aren't being satisfied, then somebody needs to change what they're doing. And it has to be one of three people. I need to change what I'm doing. And if I could only do this, or if I could only do that, or not do this, or not do that, then I would be content because I don't like the fact that I do this, or don't do this, or I know that because I do this, you do that, and I don't like it when you do that, which leads to the second thing. I need to change what you're doing. I need to change what I'm doing, or I need to change what you're doing. Because when you do that, I hate it when you do that. And so for me to be content then, I need to either change what I'm doing or I need to change what you're doing. And when you boil it right down, we're in a church, I need to change what he's doing or what he's not doing. Because if only he would give me this or that, because I know that you can't give it. I understand there's some things that you can or can't do for me that he must do. So then, he's not doing it, and that's why I'm discontent. You understand? So I'm not doing it. That's why I'm discontent, or you're not doing it. That's why I'm discontent, or he's not doing it. So to satisfy my desires, again, I need to change what I'm doing, what you're doing, or what he's doing. And we're kind of limited in that. If we sit down, there's some changes that we can make in our own lives, but not to the extent that we might want. Some of us are very goal-oriented, very driven. We make lists, and at the end of this year, we'll check off what we aspire to do and if we hit the mark. Because some of us are able to exert more influence over ourselves than others, or some of us are able to exert more influence over others. We're good at getting people to do what we want them to do. We think carefully about what we need to say to elicit from other people the right response. We're pretty clever. Some of us are very powerful with ourselves or powerful with others. Some of us might feel we're very powerful with God. We can get God to give us what we want. Some of us might feel like we have an inside track that I can ask of God and I always get from Him. However, if we're honest, we're limited by power in one of several ways. But there was a guy who seemed to be not limitless as related to power, but boy, he just didn't have a lot of tethers on him, Solomon. He was a ruler of Israel when Israel was prosperous and powerful, before they split into two kingdoms and ran into all kinds of problems from neighbor, before they were attacked by Babylon and got sacked, before they were attacked by Assyria. When they were powerful, respected, when people came to visit Solomon and said, "Holy smokes, I can't believe you get to live like this, in this affluence and this wisdom." Solomon was pretty limitless, not limitless, but he had a lot of political power. Again, he had no nations attacking him. He was at peace. He had moral power. He was wise in that sense. He was able to discern what is and is not prudent to do. He was also intellectually powerful, had a brilliant mind. He was a real Renaissance man in that sense. And he found contentment to be terribly elusive, even though he was able to marshal all these powerful resources to bring about change in himself or others. Maybe God. Look what it says in your worship folder. And he's really honest. Now, this sounds boasting, but he's wise enough to tell the truth. And that's what he says here, Ecclesiastes 2. "I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me." Again, that might sound like, oh boy, aren't you all that? But he's telling the truth. He goes on, in all this, my wisdom stayed with me. Some people, when they become powerful, lose their moral sense. If you talk to people, in fact, I did talk to some individuals in China when I was there. They say that Mao Zedong, initially in the 40s and 50s, really helped China tremendously, but the more he was in power, something went to his head, and he was not as wise toward the end, ended up doing foolish things. But this wasn't true for Solomon. He retained the ability to know what was prudent and what was not prudent. His wisdom stayed with him. Look what he goes on to say, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for my labor. Again, he wasn't just a hedonist. A hedonist is one who just exists for pleasure. And he wasn't like that. He was a guy who worked hard, rolled up his sleeve, wrote a lot, built great edifices, was a good political leader. He did very meaningful things. And when his reign was over, you could point to a number of wonderful initiatives that occurred. But he also had a pleasurable side as well. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines, liked music, boy, all kinds of stuff. Look what he said, though. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Comes to the end, and again, he had a bunch of pleasure, productivity. He wasn't a glutton, he wasn't a fool, and he wasn't content. He looked at his life and all he had achieved, and you'd think that a guy like that would come to a place where he would feel, yeah, look what I've done in terms of productivity. Look what I've done in terms of pleasure. I have lived and I'm content in my life. But he looked at everything and went, it just doesn't do what I thought it would do. He was not content. In fact, look what he ends up going on to say. All man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. He's not just talking about food. He's talking about different kinds of appetites for influence, for pleasure, for productivity, for relationship. All men's efforts, he says, are for his mouth. He wants to live off of those things that he does. That makes sense, doesn't it? You know, we work in order to create a place for family so we can enjoy family. That's okay. We work to get a legacy, but we want to feel good about our life. We want to feel good about our relationships, what we're providing. And what he ends up saying is all man's efforts are for his mouth. We want to live off of what we do, and yet our appetite is never satisfied. No matter what we're able to achieve, no matter what we're able to do, it leaves us at one level feeling, is that it? It's not quite it. When you've had a meal, good meal, and you know that feeling about there's just something missing. What is it? And that's what he ends up coming to understand. If you search for contentment by getting what you want and getting rid of what you don't want, you'll never find it and you'll never be satisfied. That's what he would say. So let's trace that back. We satisfy desires by trying to change what we're doing. I tell you what Solomon would indicate, you can change what you're doing and you will not be able to do that enough. That's what he would say. Or you could try to change what other people are doing, and you could make changes. He was able to. He was able to influence the mindsets of a whole nation of people. But when he comes to survey it, it's not enough. He brought about change. He made good things happen, but he looked at it. It wasn't enough to satisfy him. So, again, we could focus on getting everyone in our life to fall in line, to do what we want them to do. Finally, you're doing what I want you to do. You're doing what I want you to do. Everybody freeze. Don't anybody do anything different. Now, I'm content. And what Solomon would say, it's not going to last. You could change what you're doing. You could change what they're doing. You could try to change what God's doing. And what Solomon ends up coming to see, he ends up being a little jaded. The thing about him, I guess, is that he was too wise to pretend. Some people are not that wise. And they fool themselves. They deceive themselves into believing everything's fine. In fact, that's what they say to other people. Everything's wonderful. But if you really dig down, deep down to the core, if we're honest with ourselves, I think what Solomon says makes sense. Not just quite. You feel that? I have good family, good kids. I have a pretty good job. We're going to have a decent Christmas. What is it? Maybe I need to change what I'm doing, change what you're doing, change what he's doing. Solomon would say, go ahead, try. Won't be enough. Okay, then what do I do? Okay, silence desires. And if I silence desires, I don't focus on changing what I'm doing or what you're doing or what he's doing. To silence desires, I need to change what I'm wanting. I need to audit my wants. I just need to not want things. Make myself not want things. And we can try to do that. The only thing wants, you know what wants are like if you really want them? It's like suppressing wants is like trying to keep a beach ball under the water. You ever do that, beach ball? You know, you push it under the water, and you can do that, but you know the beach ball, it always wants to come up, and you have to end up doing this, and that's what wants are like. You can exercise. It takes a lot of energy to keep them down under the surface of the water. Just to try to keep it submerged. That takes a lot of energy, and some of us spend a lot of time trying to convince ourselves that, no, it doesn't matter. I don't need to be respected. I don't need that. I don't need to be productive. I don't need to be wanted. I don't need to be liked. I don't need for you to listen to what I say. And we try to pretend to ourselves, I don't need anything. Everybody leave me alone. Some of you identify with that. Do you catch a little bit of authenticity in that last statement, as if I've maybe said that to myself? Solomon points out a snag. Look what he says. I've seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. The problem with not wanting is that there's things to want. God makes everything beautiful in its time, and God knows what captures our heart, and He gives us things that are beautiful. Relationships, productivity, all these things are things that are noble. They are things that are good to want. Closeness at Christmas, that's a good thing to want. And things are beautiful in their time. And I guess that's the snag is that we can't not want because there's a lot of good stuff to want, and yet when we give ourselves to get it, it's never enough of what we want. That's what he would say. There seems to be a couple of problems that Solomon points out in this passage, and I think they make a lot of sense. He says, number one, we have a heart that wants eternal things. It says he had set eternity in the hearts of men. And we have a heart that wants eternal things. And I think here's why that's a problem. A heart that wants eternal things is a heart that wants things that don't change. A heart that doesn't want houses to decay, paint to chip, relationships to ebb and wane. A heart that doesn't want people to die. Doesn't want relatives to die. Want the same people at the table this Christmas that were here last Christmas. And we don't want bodies that break down. We want people to be in good health this year. But again, this Christmas, not everybody at the table is going to be in good health. Some people you know got sick over the past year, and they're going to hobble to the table this year. And there's something about us, I don't like that. Or some of your tables will be minus a place this year. Somebody important passed away. And there's something in us that rails against that. Why? We have eternity in our hearts. We don't want things to change. There's something within us that wants things to remain the same. Good, beautiful, and stay beautiful. And that's one of the problems. And the second problem is that we don't have a mind that understands God's purposes. That's why we're stuck. We have a heart that wants eternal things, and we don't have a mind that understands God's purposes. And so we end up thinking, God, what are you doing? Why? Why? I don't understand. And so we try to satisfy desires or silence desires, and it creates a problem. Is contentment within reach? Apparently not by satisfying our desires or silencing our desires. So again, just to recap, if you focus on changing what you're doing, what I'm doing, what you're doing, what he's doing, you're not going to be able to do enough. Focus on changing what you're wanting, I guess it's not going to be enough for us. What's the secret of contentment? Secret of contentment is that, I think Paul would tell us, contentment does not come from removed need. Contentment does not come from removed need. Again, a need is something that I want. And removing need by getting what I want, removing need by getting rid of what I don't want, what Paul would say, contentment doesn't come from that. It doesn't come from getting what you want or getting rid of what you don't want. It doesn't come from removing need. Look what he says. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. What happens is he's in prison. And Paul was pretty self-sufficient. He was one of these guys that he didn't burden other people. In fact, in his whole ministry, he could have asked for money for people, but he chose not to. That's something he wanted to do. He wanted to be self-sufficient. He was a tent maker. He would go from place to place making tents to enable himself to eat so he wouldn't have to depend on the support of people. And that was very important to him. And he didn't have a lot of things that, Paul, what can I do? I'm fine. But you try, yeah, I make tents. I'm fine. He's in prison now, though. And these people in Philippi sent him money to sustain him. And he's writing them to respond. This is what he says. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. Again, why? Paul, I think what he's saying, because I took care of my own needs. But he goes on, I am not saying this that I am in need. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. Paul had needs, and he then had what he didn't want, and he wanted what he didn't have. And although Paul had needs, it says Paul was content, which is interesting. Paul had needs, and Paul was content, or he learned to be content. See, I don't think we have to learn anything to be discontent. Discontentment comes naturally. All I have to do is live. I want that. And what Paul learned through his life, he learned to be content. When the cupboard was empty and when the cupboard was full. I think that would be something, wouldn't it? That'd be something? To be able to be content when you didn't have what you wanted? Or when you had what you didn't want? What change would that make in your life? The capacity to know you had needs, but at the same time to not be, oh, I got to change me, you, him. I've got to step on what I want. What would it be like if you didn't have to control everybody else, or step on your wants, and you could still breathe? That interests me. You'd be able to live in your own skin. You wouldn't have to pretend that you didn't have needs. You'd be able to have needs, but you'd be okay. That's what Paul learned. The Bible seems to be clear about the headlong pursuit of going after what we want. Look what it says. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his very self? Imagine you create a cure for cancer. Imagine you created a cure for cancer, and you parlay that into a huge fortune. You'd make a lot of money if you created a cure for cancer. I mean, a bulletproof cure for cancer. Just blink, take it, cancer goes away. And imagine that you could parlay that fortune into political or economic power, that you invest wisely, you end up with a huge amount of money, more money than Bill Gates has, much more. And because you have that much money, you have political and economic power. You're able to influence the course of nations by saying, if you do this, I will give you that. And the nation says, we'll do that to get that. So you're able to become very, very powerful. And you're able to parlay that power into worldwide influence and admiration. All over the world, people know your name. You are a beneficiary. You give, and people listen when you talk. And you have the key to every city in the world. What he's saying, what really doesn't matter if you get all that stuff, and yet, when you breathe your last, you lose your soul. At that point, they say you can't take it with you. What have you gained? Well, I help the world, yeah, but as it relates to what you will experience, you could go after what you want to get all the things, but what Jesus says, let's talk. Does it make sense to think only of the needs within the next 50 or 60 years and to ignore the eternal balance of your life? Because the fact is, like we say, you'll be alive in some form 5,000 years from now. Jesus is. They threw him in the grave and he came out. And Jesus said, people don't stop living when they die. They die and then they're resurrected to another form of life, either a good one or one that you wouldn't want to be in. Jesus says it doesn't make much sense to only think about the next 50, 60 years and to ignore that which is eternal. Contentment doesn't come from removed need. What Paul would say, contentment does come from received strength. In the verse, I have learned to be content. Again, it's something he learned, the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. This is used by individuals to say anything's possible. You can just imagine it and go after it, and God will give it to you, because does not the Bible say, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. I can change me. I can change you. I can change him. I can step on my desires through him who gives me strength. No, that's not the point. The point of the passage seems to be this: not that God gives me strength to get what I want, but God gives me strength to not need to get what I want. That's what Paul's saying. Not that God gives me strength to get whatever I want, but God gives me strength to not need to get everything I want and still to be content. That is something. In fact, we'll say the only thing better than getting what I want and being able to be content is not getting what I want and being able to be content. That's what Paul found. I can do that through him who gives me strength. God gives me contentment without giving me what I want. God's strength enables me to live with unmet needs and unfulfilled desires. Contentment does come from received strength. Again, the only thing better than getting what I want and being able to be content is not getting what I want and being able to be content. I think that's true. See, if my contentment basis is based on my getting you to do what I want you to do, then my contentment goes when you slip. You know how fragile contentment is when it's based on controlling yourself or others or God, or stepping on the beach ball? Some of us, we wonder why we're so tired, why I'm so energyless. Well, we're stepping on all these beach balls. We can't really face our wants because it makes us feel terrible when we realize I don't have what I want. You know what Paul figured out? You know what? I can let that beach ball come to the surface, and I can look around me and not have everything I want. But Paul learned but I've learned that I can be content. And we think of these, these are sacred desires as well. Some of the most discontented people I know are sacredly discontented people who don't have the spiritual gifts they want to have, whose spirituality is not what they want to look like, and they run from book to book to book to seminar to this, to that, always trying to find that thing that will enable me to be perfectly content with my spirituality, because doesn't God say if we make Him our desires, He will give us everything we want? Isn't that what He says? If you make God the source of your desires, God will give you everything you want, right? Everything you desire. Is that true? Hasn't been true for me. And guess what? I don't think it was true for Jesus. He said, let this cup pass from me. But not as I will, but as you will. Your will be done. I think God does give us things. Does He give us everything we want? No. Let me tell you what He does give us. And we'll talk about this in a couple weeks. He gives us strength. Strength is something. Strength gives us an ability to have what we don't want and to want what we don't have and yet to be content. God's strength enables me to be content even when I don't have what I want. We're going to talk more about this on December 31st when we talk about all I want for Christmas is strength, and we'll relate that to contentment. We're going to explore this deeply and apply it personally at the retreat we're going to do at Inspiration Hills, February 2nd and 3rd. The retreat is going to deal with contentment. We're going to look at how we can be more content. We'll look at things that rob us of contentment. And we'll be very practical. We'll look at God's strength in more detail, contentment in more detail. If this is something that you wrestle with, set that time aside, February 2nd and 3rd. We'll talk about it then. For now, though, let's imagine a Christmas morning setting. A disappointed child. I want you to imagine this. Some of you won't be that hard. It's Christmas morning. Got that? There's just one kid, one little child. Girl or boy, doesn't matter, sitting by the tree. Let's call it a boy. And the child is pouting. It didn't get what he wanted. Or maybe he had what he wanted a minute ago until he realized that it wasn't the super duper version of whatever it is, and now he's not really happy. The mom or dad comes by him. He's just sitting by the tree and the mom or dad comes by and just sits next to him, kind of maybe down on their knees, or just comes right alongside. And he's small enough to crawl up on mom or dad's lap, and so that's what they do. They're kind of sitting there, and he pulls the child to the lap, and the parent says, "You know what? I know you wanted X and so, and you didn't get it. And then the parents say, you know what, I just want you to know that I wasn't able to get it for you, but it wasn't because I didn't care for you. It's not because what you want doesn't matter to me. I want you to know that what you want really matters to me. And although I couldn't get you that thing that you wanted, it wasn't because I didn't care. I just wanted you to know that." And I don't imagine that kid will brighten up, but what I imagine, the disappointment will flicker and ebb, dissipate a little bit, and it will go out. And if she hugs, I think that, you know what you'll find, there's a sense of contentment with that child, because beneath the level of having what we want and wanting what we have, of being able to step on our wants, you know what you'll find if you dig way deep at the bottom of that pile of wants? I just want to know somebody cares about me. And I think the problem for us is when we have what we don't want, we feel uncared for. When we want what we don't have, we feel uncared for. Dig around. You do this. Think about it today or sometime this week. You dig around at the foundation of your contentment. Dig around at the foundation. You have to go down a little bit, beneath the level of I want. And I wants feel like you dig down deeper at the level of discontentment. Go down deeper than that. Keep going. And here's what you'll find. You'll find these kind of thoughts. I don't have what I want because I don't matter to people. That's what you'll find. Beneath the level of the driven, I don't have what I want because I don't matter to people. If I did matter, they would give me what I want. God doesn't give me what I want because He doesn't care about me either. You dig around at the base of your discontentment, that's what you're going to find. I don't care what the need is, if it's sacred or secular. I don't have what I want because I don't matter to people. If I mattered to you, you'd give me what I wanted. If I mattered to you, you'd take away what I don't want. If God cared about me, He would give me what I want, take away what I didn't want. That's at the base. Here's a contentment building question. In fact, I'll give you two of them. Comes from the Bible. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also along with Him graciously give us all things? He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also along with Him graciously give us all things? We personalize it. Joel Fredrickson, got a question for you. He who did not spare His own Son, but freely gave Him up for us all, how will He not also along with Him graciously give you all things? Alyssa Chambers, got a question for you. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for you, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give you all things? That's a great question. Evie Stahlheim. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for you, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give you all things? Dave Hare, I got a question for you. And Doug, you too. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for you, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give you all things? It's a good question, isn't it? Here's a question you can ask yourself. I'll say it, and I really want you to ask yourself, and we're going to close. If God gave up His Son for me, do I really believe He is holding out on me? Do I really believe He doesn't care enough about me? See, when we have unmet needs, we call God's care into question. But here's a question. I want you to ask it of yourself. If God gave up His Son for me, do I really believe He's holding out on me? Does that make sense? If He would give Jesus, that He would hold out on something less than Jesus? No. That doesn't make sense. Do I really believe He doesn't care enough about me? The worship team's going to come up now and do a last song. When they come up, I want you to look at that last question. As we deal with frustrated desires, try to satisfy them or silence them, what Paul would let us know is that the secret of contentment is that it doesn't rely on removed need, but received strength. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks. But here's a strength-building question. Strength comes from being loved. Like that little child by that tree experiences the love of the parent, and something about the drivenness of those wants goes away a little bit. Why? Because he knows he's cared for. And that's at the basis of our wanting and craving. He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up for you, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give you all things? Do you really believe God's holding out on you? Do you really believe He doesn't care enough about you? Doesn't make sense, does it? Getting everything that we want, so we're kind of stuck. I ask you'd help us to understand the warmth of your embrace, even in the midst of wanting stuff. Help us to learn the secret of contentment like Paul learned. It's not something that comes naturally, but it's something you can teach us. I pray we'd learn more about it, depending on your strength. I thank you that you do care for us and how you showed that to us. And I pray that we would be able to rest in that. In Jesus' name, amen. Next week we'll have the Children's Christmas program, and we'll talk about